you talk into your mic a second? Let's see if I
Okay.
can hear. Oh, we're in good shape.
Good.
Yeah, we're set. We're ready to roll.
Where you were born and something about your family, grandparents, you remember them? Or?
Okay. Well, I was born right on the river where we're sitting here, just about about 15 miles north of here, on the North Fork of the Kentucky River, a little place called Cornetsville, Kentucky, and that was in 1940. I was born in an old lumber camp there near the North Fork of the Kentucky River, and of course, I don't remember those years. That was, and when I was 3 years old, my father moved over to Montgomery Creek, which is in Vico, Kentucky, to where I'm now living. I live probably within a mile where I grew up, or where my father moved to in 1940. And I've been there, with the exception of being in the Army and probably in Indiana, Ohio for 6 or 7 months at a time, and living in Breathitt County probably about 7 or 8 years. I've been there practically all my life, right near where I grew up. My father was during the Depression years, he worked on the L&N Railroad, but before that, as a very young boy, really, he come over from Leslie County, Kentucky, over in the Cutchin area, and come over into Perry County, and worked at a sawmill, W.M. Ritter sawmill, which was a big operation there on Leatherwood Creek in Perry County. That's where Cornetsville's at. And I think he started working there when he was about 11 years old. My mother was born just down the river from Leatherwood Creek on a creek called Mason's Creek. And I think when he died in 1986, they'd been married 62 years. So wow. And Dad worked in the mines up until he retired in it was either 59 or 60. And during that time, he had been crushed up twice with roof falls. And along around 1956, 54 or 56, he had to have one of his lungs taken out because it was because of black lung and rock dust. And so he held on for a couple of more years after that, worked up until he was about 60.
He worked after he had one lung?
He worked, yeah, after, with just one lung. And then after he retired, he moved to Breathitt County, Kentucky. And by that time I was married. And lived until he was almost 85 with one lung, and stayed active up until about a year before he died. And he had a small farm there in Breathitt County, and he farmed the rest of his days. That's what he really loved doing anyway. Growing up on Montgomery Creek, it was we did live for a while because Dad had to walk to work. There were no roads in and out of Montgomery Creek at that time, so Dad had to walk about 4 miles to work one way every morning. So eventually we did wander farther down on Montgomery Creek to an old coal camp where we lived for about 8 years, from sometime in the 40s until about 52. And then we moved back up near the head of the creek after the roads and things come in, and where I now live.
Did you know your grandparents? Or?
I never met my grandparents on my mother's side. They passed away years and years ago when I was real small. My grandfather on my dad's side was originally or my great-grandfather rather, was originally out of North Carolina, down near the North Carolina coast. And they migrated up through from North Carolina up through the Shenandoah Valley, and a lot of the Maggards settled in Botetourt County is where I found most of them settled at during those years. And there's still lots of them there. And then the rest of them migrated on into Kentucky, and some come over on the Cumberland River, which is here in Letcher County, and some migrated on down into Leslie County. And that's where my grandfather was born, was in Leslie County, Kentucky, over in the Cutchin area. He was he worked in the logwoods all his life. That's all he ever did. He was a huge man. He never could find pants to fit him. He was so big he couldn't afford tailor-made clothes. And he had huge hands. I've never seen nobody with hands as huge as my grandfather. And he worked, in fact, he's one took my father into the logwoods when my father was 11 years old, was really helping him with a team of oxen. And my grandmother was also she was born in Leslie County on my dad's side. And her background was also her father and were mountain farmers and loggers, and that's about all was going on back during those days until the mining come into the area. And probably Dad was the first generation of Maggards, or in this particular generation anyway, to ever work in the mines. Up until that time, they were farmers and worked the logwoods.
Why did he go into the mines?
Well, he left W.M. Ritter Company. He went to after he married. He worked at the L&N Railroad. I think the wages during that time were like $2 a quarter a day. And we're talking like $29, $30 during those years. And then after he figured that he could make 50 cents, a quarter of 50 cents more on the day by leaving the railroad and coming to the mines. And I think he started in the mines, he was making about $2.25 and maybe $2.50 a day. But during that period of time, with a family, I guess that seemed like a $5 raise on the air. And that was the reason he went into the mines. And then he had the skills he had learned on the railroad, the same skills he used within the mines also. And the track, and at that time it was all pulled out by electric motors, and he got familiar with track and motors and electricity and all that kind of stuff. So that's the reason he went into the mines.
So that's the kind of job he had, was
right.
to lay the track.
He laid track, and he was, well, really he could do anything within the mines, anything. He was just sort of an all-around miner. And he got into the union, the UMW, at the very beginning of that also. When he come into the mines, the UMW was just starting up, so he was, he got involved with the UMW at a real early age. In fact, he'd already been involved with the railway unions before that. So other than working at the sawmill, Dad never worked at a non-union job as long as he worked. He was fortunate, not like some of us are today. He's always had that union protection, or always did have it, right up until he died.
Did he talk about that much with you, or did he?
You grow up with it. You growed up with it. At one time in this area here, in all these counties, every mine here was unionized up until probably the middle 50s. So you just grew up, union was, you heard it every day, every night. The neighbors talked about it. You went to union meetings with your parents, and you got that feel of solidarity at a really young age. And I won't say that about the generation after me, after all the unions had left out and everything. And I'm sure people don't get that feeling now, solidarity, they did when I was growing up here. I was a teenager in the 50s. So I become pretty well aware of unionism at a real early age.
What do you remember about those early conversations in the home and amongst the neighbors?
Well, it was... there was always, always some issue coming up. And of course, Dad would always talk about, like better working conditions. Somebody got screwed over at the mines that day, or something like that. And, they would meet, and, the neighbors would talk about it among themselves, and then they'd have a meeting at the local union hall to discuss what they, how they could deal with the company on this particular issue. Just all kinds of things you hear. There's always safety issues, and all that kind. It wasn't as much as wages as you might think it was. Of course, that did play a very important part. The union did bring better wages, but like my dad was making $13 a day in the 50s at a union mine. So, of course, that was not a lot of money, but it was a lot more than most other people were making. And so that was the kind of things they talked about. And they were always, layoffs, and, they were talking about seniority rights and all this kind of stuff. So you learn about it at a real early age if you're in an old coal camp, especially if it was unionized.
Were women part of these conversations as well?
Unfortunately, not. They were not. The husband barely discussed any issue around the workplace, or, of course, my mother had to catch some of it because she was always there. But it was really mostly the men who did most of the talking about it. The women were, it's not like it is today, I'll put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
They had their own little world too, that's for sure, raising the kids and helping make the gardens and all that kind of stuff. They were more or less the supervisors of the household.
Mm-hmm.
The man did not supervise the household too much. He was always working.
Did your mother ever work outside of the house?
My mother, only at places like a boarding house or something like that where she worked as a cook, but it was not very much.
Mm-hmm.
Not very much. I come from a family of 14, so you can figure.
You had 13 brothers and sisters?
Right.
Yeah.
So I was about the 7th or 8th one in a family of 14. She raised 10 of them.
Uh-huh.
So
Wow.
you can figure about what her duties were.
Full-time job.
Full-time job.
I just was curious about these conversations again when you were young. Did you get a sense as the conversations were happening that in the midst of them was a sense that we could do something about the safety, that we could do something about
That was at a very young age, and where I become aware of a lot of stuff was in the local schools. The local schools had been set up and really practically maintained and run by the big coal operators. And when I talk about the big coal operators, I'm talking about big companies out of Philadelphia, New York, or wherever they come from. They own most of the land we lived on. They own the houses we lived in. They controlled the company. They had a company store. So they really had what we were just captives within this area. They also influenced the schools. And I guess I was in around I become aware that when I go to school that the textbooks were always written by somebody, for God knows I don't know where, and the textbooks were always evolved around the lives of the middle class or upper middle class people in the United States. And looking through those textbooks, reading these stories, nothing didn't jive with my surroundings or my area. And I was very confused about all this. I didn't see a chapter in there about John L. Lewis or Big Bill Haywood or Eugene Debs and all those people. And there was just something wrong. There was something wrong with the way I was being taught. I was being taught for something that they were trying to make me into something I would never be, or probably didn't never want to be. And, I could walk home every night, and I walked the railroad track, and, but in these stories, their mothers come and pick the kids up in station wagons, or they took them to school in station wagons. And it just didn't, and they had white picket fences, and they had pedigreed dogs, and, all the houses were white. And, there I was living in a drab gray house in Perry County, Kentucky, in a coal camp. And I didn't learn nothing, everything I learned was something, I'd never heard about, or wasn't aware of. And it was good to learn about those things, don't get me wrong, you do learn something. You learn how to read, probably. But and that confused me all the way through school, even when I got into high school, it was the same thing. Of course, you had the math, and you had the English, and all the history. If you read the history of Kentucky, you'd think Daniel Boone settled every bit of it. He come here and he built every town, he built every house, he surveyed every river, he built the railroad track. He done everything. Nobody did anything in Kentucky but Daniel Boone. Henry Clay made a lot of noise. He talked a lot, but Daniel Boone done all the work. So you wonder about these things, what in the world's going on here? Oh, it's great Daniel Boone come through the Cumberland Gap and took an axe and chopped the road out through it. But my God, there was other things happening in Kentucky. Oh, what the hell is? Who really built Kentucky? You wonder about these things, but they never tell you about nothing. And they teach you about democracy. You got Thomas Jefferson, and they never mentioned the fact George Washington, and in our history, they never mentioned these guys were the biggest slave owners in the whole United States at that time. You know, so we never learned those things in school. I never learned about nothing. You don't really learn a lot about nothing, and you learn nothing about yourself. So you go through all this period of your life. You got people up here trying to brainwash you, and you're trying to figure out what's going on, you know, with your own self. And you just get screwed up something awful. And when I become aware of what was really happening, you know, I set out, you know, to seek information on myself. I become an avid reader of labor history. I read all the classics. I wanted to find out about that kind of stuff also. You know, we touched on a lot of this stuff except the labor and all the local history in the schools. But to get them more in depth, you just have to go off and do it on your own, I figured. So I really would say that the education I got it by just wanting to know something or just wanting to do something different and wanting to find out about myself, about my background, who I am. And I didn't give a damn about who George Washington was, and I didn't give a shit who Thomas Jefferson was. I wanted to know who Buck Maggard was. I wanted to know who my family was, and I wanted to learn about my community. So all that stuff I've really had to learn on my own.
Do you remember at what age, Buck, that this became kind of an active pursuit, the self-education?
When I first become aware, I guess, was when I didn't get started into school until I was about 8 years old. I had a physical problem, which I'd start in and I'd get real ill and I'd have to quit. And my mother taught me how to read. My mother was actually the one who taught me how to read. She had some old books that I forget what they were, that she'd had when she was going to school. She was the educated one in the family, by the way. My mother had actually graduated from high school. My dad never even went beyond the 4th grade. So she taught most of us how to read, the whole family how to read, in fact, even before we started school. And that was through old books and the Bible and this and that. When I first become aware of, you know, that things wasn't right was just probably in about the 5th or 6th grade when it began to dawn on me, hell, this is not the life I live. This is not my history. Probably at that early.
How did that affect your relationships with the school and stuff? Did you become kind of a problem child? Or
No.
Kind of
No, in fact, I was an honor student.
Uh-huh.
You won't believe it, but I was an honor student all through school. All through school. But it was so easy to be an honor student. It was all you had to do is relate what you had read from that book. That was always good at taking tests. It didn't really mean I learned anything. And I won't say I didn't learn anything, but, you know, I didn't learn the things I really wanted to learn in that setting.
I mentioned what life in the coal camp in those days was like. I mean, was there, in terms of other community activities, music and church and stuff like that?
But the other activities, there was always music. I've always been interested in. That's why I'm so interested today in preserving traditional music. It was always there. There was someone in every community that played the banjo or the fiddle or the guitar or the auto harp or something. And a lot of evenings were spent around probably in front of the old company stores and places like that, or a wide place beside the railroad track, listening to people play music. And old people tell stories about growing up, you know, and how it was before the coal companies come in and all that kind of stuff. It was always really interesting. That's where I really learned a lot of the history of the area, was from those people. Church, we had a Methodist church, which was the coal companies paid the preacher. But none of us ever went to that one. And the only people that went to that were the bosses and their families. We had our own church there in the camp, sort of a Pentecostal. It was a family thing, and for all the neighbors, and we'd gather up at somebody's house on a Saturday night, and you'd have singing and music, and of course the preaching and testifying and all that. And it was more like a a rock and roll a party, you know. And everybody get in there on a Saturday night, and of course some of the men probably be a little tanked up, you know, before they come, and the women would all dress up in their finest clothes they had, and they'd kind of stick us kids up and take us off to this particular house where the church was being held at that night, and just have a really good time. And it was music, and there'd be a lot of shouting and a lot of, you know, getting into the spirits. Of course, a lot of them was in the spirits before they got there, so it wasn't very hard to do. But it was really, this is how people, I guess, looking back on it, it was how they sort of got rid of the frustrations that had built up during their life through the week. And this is that one time of a week that they could go and be with the neighbors and sort of, you know, it's sort of a spiritual thing, of course, and sort of get rid of that frustration. And I guess that's why more people, most people in that camp followed the Pentecostal faith. Of course, that changed later on. You know, people got into being free will Baptists and all that kind of thing. But that was probably the dominant religion in that particular camp I grew up, was the Pentecostal, or they call it the Holiness. They finally did build a church house, which still stands today, which is still there.
Did you have you said there were bosses in the camp and different, I mean, there are different kinds of people. Did you have a sense of, even though you had a union there that, you know, was strong and kind of protected people from certain things, do you have a sense of kind of them and us? And
it was very obvious. The camp was split. We actually live in 3 camps. We lived in where the working man lived, the ordinary coal miner. And then you had this other section where the bosses, the houses were much finer. Most of them had indoor plumbing. And then farther up the creek, right up to where you couldn't get no further unless you went across the mountain or through it, you had the blacks. They were scooted way back, away from everybody. They had separate schools. Had a separate school. Our school was located about 200 yards from the black school, but we never associated with those kids during school days. We did socialize on the weekend. In fact, a lot of the black people would come down into the camp and go to church and visit with the working miner. They never went to the bosses' houses.
Did they come to church?
They would come to church.
So the holiness meetings would be
right.
Black and
they would be integrated. They would be integrated, even though the schools wasn't. I never went to school with a black kid sometime in around 56 or 57 probably.
And so they worked in the mines.
They worked in the mines also.
But they lived in these.
Yeah, but they lived in, we were all segregated, you know, segregated.
So you had a sense of, you know, kind of divisions within the community.
There was, it was certainly there, but you know, it didn't exist at the 2 lower rungs of the ladder. They had a lot in common. The ones that didn't want anything to do, that was keeping us apart, lived between us. They always were there, you know. So we did have that sense of division. It was certainly there. But in terms of race, I won't say that racism didn't exist among all the people there, but it was certainly not as obvious. It probably would have been in the Deep South at that time or even later. So we got along well together. And then you know, you had a mixture. You had Italians that would live in the camp. You'd have Polish and Hungarians from all backgrounds. You know, they'd come into the mountains to work in the mines, and it was amazing how well that they just sort of blended in with the ordinary working man. Of course, coming from the backgrounds that they did, it was, you know, it was probably the reason.
When you decided to go into the army, let's see, you were about 17 or 16?
Barely 17. That was the year my dad got sick. He was laid up for 6 months. That was the year he had his lung taken out. And at that time, I was the oldest one at home. I had one older brother at that time, and there was just a whole bunch of girls in between us. Some of them had married off, and the oldest brother had already working in the mines and was married and had a family. And I was the oldest one at home, and I didn't want to go into the mines at that particular time. So I went to the Army. And Now that, you know, that's a whole different experience. But that would have been the first time I'd ever traveled any. Was really around the mountains for any length of time. And looking back, and I don't regret going. You know, I wasn't overjoyed after I got there, but I don't regret going because it did give me a look at the other part of the world at that time I hadn't seen.
So you saw it as a way of supporting yourself, or?
I think at that time I paid. I got I think we got $62 a month, somewhere in this $62, $64 something that month. Well, you could send, like if you sent 30 of that home to your parents, they would match it. So it was more in terms of the economics than it was that, you know, I was going to be Sergeant York, sort of thing.
Was that something that was common among
Very
your
common.
friends and stuff? Do that?
Very common. If you look back at the history of the mountains, and especially this area, during World War II, they filled their quotas with volunteers. And some counties didn't even have to use the draft. So I don't know, a lot of it may have been a sense of patriotism, but a lot of it just had to do with the economics of the thing also. And of course, a lot of them never did come back, you know. But anyway, it was a chance to get away. It was a chance to help the family out, and I dropped out of school, and I was a junior in high school. I advanced pretty fast after I got started in school. I advanced real fast through the grades.
One thing, this is going back a little bit. Was there much of a legacy of the New Deal and of the kinds of things that happened during Roosevelt's administration here? Do you remember?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That was very obvious there in the area where I grew up at. My dad never worked at the WPA. He was fortunate; he had a job during that period. But a few of the lucky, you know, he was one of the lucky ones. My dad always said that Herbert Hoover made a Democrat out of him because he was raised a really conservative Republican up until the Depression years. And even though my grandfather never did switch over, his ideals about things changed, you know, after the Depression years when everybody had it so hard. And even though my dad had a job, it still wasn't easy, you know. And so, yeah, you know, you always hear the stories about the WPA, you know. If you look around Whitesburg, you see all the mason work of the old bridges and stuff, and all that was made by Italian people. They were great rock cutters, and a lot of the old school buildings around it, or what's left standing, were made during the WPA years. And a lot of the roads were built during those years. So it was, you hear a lot of talk about that, all kinds of stories about working for the WPA, and yeah, it was very obvious. And and Franklin Roosevelt was their hero. They had two heroes, and neither one of them was George Washington or Daniel Boone. It was Franklin Roosevelt and John L. Lewis. That was the talk. Yeah. So you learned about that real fast.
And so the legacy of those years and the kinds of changes they made in the mountains and everything were obvious to you.
Very obvious growing up, and even to the place, the road, where I live right now, there was not a road in there until around 55.
So how did you just walk on past?
You could get up the creek in the summertime in a big truck. In a truck, not a car, a big truck. I'm talking about a 2-ton truck. And that was it. And the rest of it was walk past and sled roads, even in the 50s. Up until the mid-50s anyway. So we're talking about really remote country even during that period when the rest of the world was, you know, much further progressed than we was. In fact, we didn't have electricity until we moved into that coal camp. That was all deducted from the miner's pay, the rent, the electricity, so much a month for the doctor, who was always a quack, and all that was deducted from your paycheck before you...
Did you have to trade at the company store?
You didn't have to. You didn't have to, but the problem of that was you didn't have any way of getting out and then going anywhere else. Very few people owned cars. Very few. So you were sort of a captive to to it. Most people did trade at the country store, and most people always were overdrafted when they got their payday. They always owed the company. They always managed to owe the company.
Did a lot of people have that same sort of feeling about these companies?
And the kids that weren't born at home, the mother had problems. That's where they usually went to have the babies. And that was it in terms of medical care. Was the company doctor in that one hospital, and a few doctors in Hazard that time.
Was the hospital perceived in the same way as a place that didn't give particularly good care? Or was it?
I would say, with the facilities they had at that time, it was adequate. It was adequate care anyway. And they were a very caring bunch of people, those Catholic nuns were. And then later on, you know, we had the big hospital, the UMWA hospitals come in. After that, really the miners was one financed that through assessments and everything from the union, and they built that. And so the medical care got better. It never did get up to where it ought to be, but it got better, a lot better. And you had the medical card too, so you could, you know, the UMWA medical card.
Did you said the Army was a different experience? What was? I'm just curious what that was like and what kind of impact that had on.
Well, you know, the Army just hits. You're trained for one thing. The only thing you're trained for is to kill people. That's it. That's the reason they have an army. You train people to kill other people. And I never did have any desire to kill anybody. You know, I know I get mad sometimes and choke somebody a little bit, but I never really had any desire to shoot somebody. And so that's another thing you learn about the United States or America. And we spend big money every year, even during those years. And that was at the very beginning of the nuclear age and all that, to train people how to kill other people. It's a big business, you know, tanks and airplanes and guns. And that didn't sit too well with my philosophy, you know. And I know you hear about all the violence that took place here in the mountains, you know, back in the early years. And no doubt they were feuds among families, but all in all, we were very peaceful people. As long as people left us alone. We didn't like to be bothered, you know. But if you just leave us to ourselves, we were very peaceful people. And then, of course, somebody's going to fly mad sometime and shoot somebody, or maybe cut somebody, or knock them in the head with a club. But that happens everywhere. Of course, we were known for a very, very feudish type people, stereotyped as that. You know, laying up on the hill with an old rifle, waiting for somebody to walk out of their house to shoot them. That's never been true. There has been incidents like that. I'll say that. But overall, we are very peace-loving people. And we don't really like killing other people.
Where did you go in the Army?
I was at Fort Knox in Kentucky and Leonard Wood in Missouri. And I taught people how to kill people. That's what I did after I got out of basic training. That was my duty. After they learned me how to kill people, I was to pass that on to the other recruits when they come in. That's what I did.
What did you do when you got out of it? So you just stayed in for a couple?
I got out sometime in '59, and it was I got married in '59 also. So that was two good things happened to me. I got out of the Army that year, and I got married, and I went to work. And this is where we're getting into the first time I was ever on picket lines and all that was in '59. After I'd come back out of the Army. I went to work strip mining. At that time it just started. It was just the very beginnings of it. And at first they brought in these huge augers where they would just sort of open up beside the mountain and bore the coal out, and he'd come out and go into a truck. So I got a job on a auger, working on an auger. And I worked there about, not over 3 or 4 months. And of course I joined the UMWA at that time. And I worked there about 3 months, and they decided we had this bloody strike, really horrible strike. It was, what was happening, the Union was really losing ground fast in eastern Kentucky. The big coal companies by that time had sort of moved out. And what you had left was a bunch of what we call dog holes. What they done, they just pulled out and said, we quit. Leased it out to other people, so much a ton. Money all went to the same people, they did the same train, hauled it out. And this was a way of breaking the union, I guess, where they saw breaking the union. So it held on for a few years after that. It was pretty strong up until about 59. They were getting worried because they were losing membership. And so they started this organizing drive sometime in late 58 or something like that to organize all these dog holes operations in eastern Kentucky. This thing lasted about a year. It's probably one of the most bloodiest strikes since the 30s. And finally the National Guard had to come in. It really got, there were people shot. There was one, my buddies killed about a mile from where I live now, shot in the back by a coal operator, and the state police took the blame for that. And so when I was 19, I was on the picket line at Vico. That's on Montgomery, where Montgomery Creek comes out into Carr Creek, and there's a little town there called Vico, which is the post office. So I was on the picket line when I was 19 years old. I just come out of the armed forces like maybe 3 or 4 months, and there I was. They was on one side of the railroad track, and I was on the other one as a striking miner. It just it really didn't make sense to me, So that's where I first got involved really got involved in doing anything in terms of community organizing and all that. Was that one experience there in 1959 with the strike. Very young, very naive, to be honest about it, about what was going on.
What did you do? What kind of activities what things did you get involved in with the union then?
In that particular strike, I was just on the picket line like everybody else. And we were shot at from the mountains by, thugs, I guess it was. A lot of them were arrested by the FBI for blocking interstate commerce and all kinds of things like that happened. A lot of them were just framed up. My brother-in-law spent 6 months in the federal pen. It was my wife's brother for, they say, blocking a railroad track and worried under nights beside the point. He spent the time for it just the same. And just that kind of thing. There were houses blown up. There were railroad bridges blown up. Temples burned. Just all sorts of things went on during that period. And that was probably the last big drive that the union made. The drive itself was a complete failure. It was a complete failure. The union completely failed. But by that time, automation was taking over. And even though they were, less men would be working, more coal would be produced because of automation, and the union at that time become more interested in the tonnage and the royalties than they did people.
So this is about time John L. Lewis died, I guess.
He was still president of the union at that time, I think he was. He died sometime in the 60s, yeah. And then we went through, Tony Boyle, I think, took over sometime in around 63 or 64, somewhere along in there.
So
and then it all went downhill.
Yeah. Were you starting to lose kind of faith in the union even with this?
Well, you know what it was? People still held on to the dream that the union was going to come back strong. And this existed up until about, I'd say until probably late 1962. And then all of a sudden they started getting these memos from the Health and Retirement Fund that they would revoke. All their health cards were going to be revoked. All of them. They were just across the board, Everybody's health card was going to be revoked. And then you got into a period where you had a really civil war, a sort of a revolution took place from there up to about 64. And it was called the Roving Picket Movement, where we just hundreds of people would gather up every morning and go to a particular coal mines and shut it down for that day and then move on somewhere else. And this got really violent also. And that was also a time we had the National Guard back in again.
Could you talk about that just a little bit more? I'm interested in how things move from this period of more kind of organized, structured resistance through the Union and through traditional channels to this
Right.
more.
Well, what was happening during the 50s, you know, you had a coal boom up until while the war was going on, World War II. And John L., you know, he pulled the miners out several times. One time, right during war, when they said he couldn't do it. So he went ahead and pulled them out anyway. So they needed the coal real bad. And so, you know, they were willing to bargain with the Union, even the coal operators were. And that started to change in the 50s. For one thing, America itself began, you know, the industrial world began to change. We were moving away from, like the railroad, even the railroads itself was moving away from using coal to run the engines because they were converting over to diesel. You had a lot of the big manufacturing companies, the big manufacturers, who were converting over to natural gas and oil and that kind of stuff, you know, to run that. And the demand for coal was just down. And then you had, you know, sort of going through a recession, you know, you're changing back over from a war economy back to, you know, and all that. And so there was not a really demand for coal during the early 50s or all through the 50s, really. And then the big companies who were going to survive had sunk millions of dollars into all the new mining technology to get more coal for less man. The Union went along with this. In fact, the Union itself, at that time, owned one of the biggest banks in the United States, but not one dime of that money was ever put into training miners to do something, you know, equip them for other jobs or helping other industries come down. So they just sort of forgot about these people who's going to be laid off. They just forgot about them and really done nothing to help them. Even John L. didn't. And this continued all through the 50s. We had a really great depression here during the Eisenhower administration, almost as bad as Hoover days here in the mountains. So this went on for about 10 years, you know, and the Union was gradually losing ground, but it wasn't really doing a lot to help it, you know. They were just sort of going on with the bigger coal companies, you know, you produce more coal, give us more royalties, and we'll just sort of let this thing drag on. We're not going to do nothing about it, which they didn't. And that's really, I think even though I say that was a bloody strike in 50, I think it was really a token effort on the part of the Union to really get these men back in the mines, you know, and get them back to work. I think it was a very token effort. They could, you know, they should have started 10 years earlier and they didn't. And this was all building up here in the mountains. And then the 59 strike would be a complete failure. And then you had 2 years of no union activity, and you had very few union mines left in the area at that time. And then they revoked your health card, something that you'd had since 1946 or something like that. And there all of a sudden you're left with not only a job, you don't have any health benefits. You have absolutely all the stuff you worked for or had worked for, all of a sudden it's gone. You have nothing. Absolutely nothing left from all those years you've been in the Union. And that started happening in 1962 when they started revoking the cards. And that's when all the miners started just organizing in masses. You know, they were just really, you know, it wasn't even safe to be outside your house. And it sure wasn't safe to be neutral. You either had to be on one side or the other. So we opted for the Union side and was very much, as a young man, still very much involved in that movement. And I was on the youth committee of it, of the roving picket movement. And this went on, the fighting and everything went on up until around 1964. I mean, it was really hard. And then Kennedy was elected president. And just up before he was killed, you know, he got some legislation to Congress, you know, the OEO and everything was being created. And some money was supposedly going to be sent to eastern Kentucky, and then he was assassinated in 63, I believe it was. Well, just after the assassination of Kennedy, a bunch of miners organized and got a bus and went to Washington and picketed the United Mine Workers and the White House. And this time Lyndon Baines Johnson was president. And he'd promised that they'd come up there, he'd listen to them, but when they got up there, he wouldn't talk to them. Johnny L. Lewis, the union wouldn't even let them park in their parking lot. These were ex-union miners. They would not let them park in their parking lot. So while they were there, they met a lot of people from the Teamsters Union who were very sympathetic at that time, even though Jimmy Hoffa, I think at that time, probably was, at that time, president of the Teamsters. And then he sort of become the hero of these rolling pickets because he was the one, that was the one union they could, like he invited them into the offices, he got them places to stay while they were up there. And they finally did get in to talk to, I think it was George Reedy, who was he was some kind of an aide, probably the White House staffer or head or something like that. And George Reedy, he was an aide he agreed to talk with these miners while they were up there. And he promised them if they would come home, get organized, really get organized, and, formally, that they could get X number of dollars for job training programs and stuff like that. But it just so this was the very beginning of the war on poverty in eastern Kentucky as I know it. Mm-hmm. And that, as the result of those miners going up there, I think $1 million was sent to eastern Kentucky for a jobs training program. But that jobs training program was controlled by the same people that these people were fighting. Mm-hmm. The local courthouse games, the local chamber of commerces, and all that. So at the very beginning, they got control of that money. And it was them who determined who would be on those programs and who wouldn't. So it didn't really, well, it did help in terms of there was money and some people were, even though a lot of it was make-work projects, were working, that there was some money. And people were getting a little money back into the, so the miners themselves come back and organized into a thing called the, what was it? Oh boy. The Appalachian Committee for Full Employment was the first community action organization in Perry County. Mm-hmm. And it was organized by one of my heroes, an old man by the name of Everett Thorpe, who's now dead. And they was the one who drawed up the community action plan for eastern Kentucky, and then later it was taken away from them, of course. So I began working with Everett Thorpe during that period. Everett was an old union organizer, and he was in his 60s. He'd retired from the mines then. And I got hooked up with him as his aide. And I guess there's where, I really got my biggest influence in life in terms of knowing how to deal with people, in terms of labor. Well, I probably learned more from Everett than I did anybody because I worked with him day and night for about 3 years. And
tell us a little bit about him or his background.
He was raised in Breathitt County. Everett was. Come from a large family of a mountain. His father was a mountain farm, and he'd worked. He'd somehow managed around and got an 8th grade education. That was almost impossible during the period he was growing up in the early 1900s in Breathitt County, I'm sure. But anyway, he somehow got educated, and he got interested in law. And he always wanted to be a lawyer, is what he really wanted to be, but he never had the money to go to college. He never had the money, so he had to go to work. Now, I think he originally started working on the railroad also. He started out working on the railroad at a really young age and managed to study law. He'd gotten hold of all these law books, and he really, really knew law. Labor law especially, he really knew that. He could quote it to you all day. And he was also a supporter of Eugene Debs. He got acquainted with Eugene Debs at some convention in New Jersey or somewhere, I forget it was, way back in the 20s or 30s. He'd gotten up there, and he had met Debs personally. And I think he was even one of Debs' supporters when he ran for president, when they had him in prison. So he had all that background. He'd met all these people. Debs was one of his heroes, and he'd been involved in all the railroad strikes. And later he come into the mines, and he got to organizing in the mines as organizing UMW. Forward 5 times by the company for his union activity and ended up being superintendent of the company. So, you know, he had a lot going for him. So here I meet this guy, you know, and he's willing to take me under his arm. I was his organizer. He's going to learn me how. He was going to learn me how to organize people, and he did. I really got to admit that the guy really did. He really knew how to, and he was at this time getting sort of up in the years. He just didn't have the energy to do it no more. So he needs somebody to do that for him. So I worked with him, and he was one that taught me all the little tricks and how to deal with a group and how to deal with individuals and how to get in and out of a community without getting shot, you know, and all that kind of stuff. And I really owe a lot to Everett Thorpe. I got to say that. He was really a big influence in my life.
What were some of his secrets or his tricks?
There are no secrets. There really are no secrets. One thing we always did, we never talked about anything we didn't know what it was, what we couldn't, what we had to know exactly what we was talking about, and the whole secret of it is just knowing what the hell you're doing, knowing what you're talking about, and somebody asking you a question, be able to answer it. And be yourself is the most important thing. Just be yourself. And don't try to be nothing other than what you are. Was the big secret of that.
So were you still working in the mines as you were doing? Were you working and then working on the?
Yeah, and just after that, that was my first go around with Everett. And after that, I moved back down into Breathitt County and stayed till about 2 years after that. And there I got hard on as one of the supervisors of the WET program, Work Experience and Training Program, which was, quote, the Happy Pappies. You know, okay? So I got involved in that, and had this group of people. I was out with this group of people one day fighting forest fires, and with the State Forestry Department. And we'd worked like 12 hours. 12 or 14 hours, all day long. And if you never fit far in your life, you don't know what you're going through. Blisters all over your hands and your feet. You're burned up. And it's right in the hottest, driest part of the year. There's no way you can contain a fire in eastern Kentucky when it's windy and hot and dry, you know. But we contained one, big one, and started home. And these guys said, we got to go somewhere else. There's this big fire up there. They need everybody, you know, like they bringing in people from all over the state to fight this right in the head of Quicksand, Kentucky, which is 40-some miles from the county seat. So they hauled us up there, and we got up there about 10 o'clock at night. And I was so damn tired I couldn't stand up. Honest to God, I couldn't have walked another 100 yards if I'd have had to. So I just said, look, I'd learned some things from Everett. You know, there's no way you can work us over 88 hours a day without giving us a break and letting us eat. I ain't going to do it. You know, the other guys want to do it. These guys want to do it, they can do it. But I am not making these men go to work. They work. They've not had a break. They've not had dinner. And they're not going to do it unless they get it. And they said, you will work. We're going to make you work. And we had this big old guy here. One old guy, he just went up so far and started back over this way. You know, big, tall guy, you know, big old, tall, stout guy. And this force warden pulled out a goddamn 44 Special out of his holster and stuck it in this big old guy's gut and pulled the damn trigger and the damn thing snapped. I don't know what in the shit happened. Then he shot under his foot and the damn thing went off. You may have how it come around to an empty chamber or what happened, I don't know. Well, when this happened, the other people started getting mad, and they just said, well, the hell, if you go ahead and kill us, we're not going to work either. So there was about 8 of us, sort of just walked off. And we walked 40-some goddamn miles to Jackson, to where the main office was. And we got there about 2 o'clock the next day. I mean, we walked every damn step of it. And you talk about blisters, we had them. And what happened there, they said, well, we'll take care of this. You all just we don't want it in the newspapers or anything like this. We'll take care of this little incident now. And Buck, you've done a real good job with these people. I tell you what we're going to do. We're going to let you have an office job. So here I am. all of a sudden, I'm sitting in the private office in the county judge's office of Breathitt County, doing nothing, absolutely nothing. I'm there. I ain't got no duties, you know. And so I started getting an idea of how county governments work. And God, there's nothing no more corrupt than Eastern Kentucky politics. Still is. It's not changed none since the 60s. This was in 1966, by the way. And I just sat there and I got thinking about that incident, how, you know, there was never nothing done about that. Mm-hmm. There was absolutely never. Those guys were treated like shit. Nobody didn't really give a damn. I was responsible for those men on that and at that particular day, and I let them down. I ain't doing nothing about it either. So what I did, I had access to a telephone. I didn't have one at home. So I just sat there day in, day out, calling all these old boys, these unemployed fathers, and other people I knew, saying, look, you know, we're getting shit over left and right in this damn county. We got to do something about this. And we finally, we organized. I got those people organized from the county judge's office in Breathitt County, using their money and their funds. So we started an organization called the Breathitt County Grassroots Citizens Committee, the first all-poor group was ever put into in Breathitt County. In fact, there were no other organized groups there except the JCs, the Lions Club, and Marie Turner, who was the superintendent, ruled it with R&H and had for 30-some years. So we got this organization started right under her nose, and she didn't know what the shit was going on. And when we got started, we were fortunate. At that time, there were some vistas come into the area, and it was sort of helping us natives out, the heathens, so to speak. And so we just trying to figure out a way to use them too. You know, hell, you know, we know that part of the system, so we'll just use them also. So we got them on their side, and they'd come in, you know, like to start daycare programs and things like that for Marie Turner's. She was sponsoring them, by the way. So we got them over on their side and got a newspaper put together. Put out a little thing called the Grassroots Gossip, and we'd tell what was happening in the courthouse, and you know, and we'd send these things. We'd put them together. My brother was the editor of it, Jim, and we put this little thing together every week. And we used Marie Turner's mimeograph machine that she didn't know about, and her stationery to print it on. You know, and we'd send this little thing out all to all the agencies in the state and all over Washington, the OEO offices in Washington, which is the congressman's office, the senators, you know, all in Washington was getting all this information from this little group of people about Eastern Kentucky. And they didn't know what the shit was going on up there, you know. They thought the revolution had done started in Breathitt County. But anyway, we finally did get recognized by the local community action program, and out of that little group, and they really put the screws to us too. They tried every way in the world to disband the group and do everything in the world. But out of that little group, we got there was some things accomplished. We got roads into communities which had never had a road, in a very short time. The school children, you know, like they would build bridges so they wouldn't have to wade the creek, and then the school buildings in general got fixed up, and so they were, you know, it did, and then we made a big difference in who could be elected in that county. Because you got 300 or 400 people. That's a big vote, and these people have got families, so they did see it as a threat. So from that threat, really was what, you know, there were a lot of things, and the poor guys who were working on these programs got better condition, but they got tools to work with, transportation. So there was a lot of things come out of that organization. And of course, they finally got rid of me, to say the least. I no longer had my private office in the county, in the courthouse. I can assure you that. And so I was without a job, and I come back up into Hazard. Up in Prairie County, well, up near where I live right now, and began working in the mines again. And I'd worked about 3 or 4 months, and the telephone rang one evening when I come home, and it was Everett once more, saying, look, Buck, I need your help. I said, good, Everett, what do you need? And he had some way wiggled his way around into becoming the community action director of Prairie County. I have no idea how this happened. And he said, I need an assistant. Would you like to work for me again? I said, well, I certainly would, you know. So I went down, I began working with Everett Thorpe once more. And we set out to, he had this master plan of how Perry County could be organized. So it took us several months to get that thing, you know, figured out what we was going to do there. And we set about organizing the county once more. And what we did was, we did organize 15 communities in Perry County during that period. And we started 15 community centers. And we actually had two black community centers in that county. And then all of a sudden we had another big powerful organization. We called this, the main organization was called the Perry County Citizens Action Committee. And what we did, we went around in the various communities and set up organizations, said, now you elect the people to this Perry County Community Actions, which was run by Everett Thorpe, of course. And through that we did get representation from the communities on the local community action boards, and had a voice in all the programs that was coming into the area at that time, like Head Start, Job Corps. So we had a big so this was probably the Breathitt County experience and the Perry County experience once more was probably where I got most of the background in community organizing. And I'm going to tell you, it was really a hard job both places. Breathitt County, I walked more than I rode because there were, you know, a lot of places I went to there were no roads, and so I had to walk and in and out of the hollers and do that kind of stuff. Perry County was a little easier. You get around it, and I had a car. So it became a little easier. So that was probably where I done most of the organizing in my whole career, in my whole life, was there in Perry and Breathitt counties. But anyway, finally the organization got so strong, Washington really got scared of that Perry County organization. And they started putting the screws to me and everything. In fact, even the board, it finally merged into a 4-county CAP board. They did this to get rid of Perry County, is what they really done, you know, so it wouldn't have all the power. So they made they merged the community action agencies into a 4-county CAP, which took over, you know, you had 3 more counties to fight with than you previously had. And really put the screws to me and Everett. But by that time, I'd got hooked up with a group of conservationists in the area called the Appalachian Group Save the Land and People, who were just beginning their fight against strip mining. And that was that really got violent also. We've had a lot of violent stuff happen in the 60s and 70s here. So by that time, I was hooked up with them while I was working with the Community Action Program. And they were operating in Knott County, just getting organized in Knott County. So I got in over there and helped with some of that organizing. And finally it got so rough, we just resigned. I resigned first, and Everett hung on a few months after that. Then he resigned from the Community Action Program also. And then I went with a group called the Appalachian Volunteers, which is started at Berea College. And was still very much active in the strip mine struggle, and we were not out to abolish the broad form deed, we were out to abolish strip mining. You know, the broad form deed could go, strip mining still here. You know, we finally did get rid of it, but we still got strip mining destroying the land.
Let's go back. Let me go back a little bit just for a minute. I'm interested in the impact that these community action programs had. Maybe you could even, you said this Happy Pappy program that you worked on initially. And that was just was it kind of a make-work?
It was a make-work program. It really was. It didn't last all that long. But what did come out of that, as far as lasting stuff, it come out of OEO. Of course, you had Head Start into schools for the first time, which I think's meant a lot to school kids. And you had the job training, you had Job Corps come out of that, which, you know, depending on how you look at that, I'd say it's been pretty successful, especially for kids, you know, like from low-income families getting to learn a trade. And So there were some positive things come out of that. I think you had, as a result of that, people become more politically inclined. That whole period, again, you know, we're talking about younger people now because the old Depression era, people were dying out and the New Dealers were really going. So people really, the younger people, which I was much younger then, got that period in their life where they could spend with these old New Dealers and these people, and I think from that, you know, sort of passed the torch on to them, you know, to keep this thing alive and keep the spirit alive, and you know, get in there and fight for what you need. And I do think there was some health care, I think, improved. School systems, you know, when you got Title I, Title II money for all sorts of improvements in the education system. So there was a lot of positive things coming out of that whole period. You know, I do know that, and they did have an impact on the mountains, you know, and on the people. And with those programs, of course, they were jobs created. You know that they were real jobs created in working within the programs. And you know, for the first time, you know, the teachers had aides in the schools. So just looking back on it, you know, there's a lot of negative things that did happen during that period, and we'll agree with that. But there were a lot of positive things. And I think the most positive thing, you had people like Eula Hall come out of that. I mean, there's nothing more positive than that, really.
Well, this community participation, and this was an aspect that was written into the law, just, you know, with maximum
feasible participation. Well, that's what we did that. We did that in Prairie County, and it looks good on paper, but philosophically it don't work in Washington. Because when you get people, you know, writing up their own programs and running them, it don't work well in Frankfort and Washington. It really don't. It's just rhetoric is all it is.
So they didn't support it?
Absolutely not. In fact, they passed the Green Amendment. Our congressman at that time, a really liberal congressman, the late Carl D. Perkins, he got so scared of it in the 7th District, and he was the one that helped write the OEO legislation, or said he did. But if he'd read the doggone thing, and nobody never voted for it, it was against every institution in the United States. The legislation itself was. It was written. You ought to read it sometime. It's amazing what's in that stuff. And then all of a sudden, these senators and congressmen read this and said, my God, you know, there's no way we can let this go on. These people will take over. And they would have. I mean, if you look at that legislation, I don't know if you've ever seen it. Honest to God, it just breaks everything, even the churches. It don't leave nobody out. And old Perkins, he got scared. He was head of the House Labor Committee at that in education. He was actually about the third powerfulest man in Washington. He was chairman of the Labor Committee and all that kind of stuff. He got the shit scared out of him because people were just raising all kinds of hell down here in the 7th District, you know. And he wanted to do something about that, but he was afraid to do it. Politically, he was afraid to do it because all these people had voted for him, you know, and he wanted to keep them. And so he got, I think, where was this woman from? Edith Green? Well, she was from out west or northwest or somewhere, one of those states. Was a freshman congressman and just got elected. So he hoodooed her into writing up the Green Amendment. But it was Carl Perkins's legislation, who it was, but he was afraid to give all this power back, take it back, and give it back to the local superintendents, county judges, and all that. He thought we didn't know about that. Old Carl did. But I mean, they caught on to it. After a couple of years, they really figured out what was happening real fast, and they knew they had to do something about it. So we got the Green Amendment. Why
were they scared of this?
Well, it just... when people get to making decisions for themselves, and especially people who have never really had, or have never done it or never had the opportunity, and you're in office, and then all of a sudden they start asking you questions that you don't want to answer, it scares the hell out of you. And that's exactly what was happening. People were starting to get more involved in, you get people organized and get involved in this stuff. They start asking questions. And it usually always leads to the local courthouse or the state house or Washington. In the final analysis, that's where it all ends up. You know, here's the problem, and you know it scares the hell out of people. They want to stay in office. so they're going to get rid of you any way they can.
You had mentioned earlier that when you went back for the second time to work with Everett Thorpe that he had sort of a master plan of organizing Prairie County. Could you just talk a little bit about what that plan was?
That plan was, it was real simple. We targeted communities that sort of spread out throughout where we could say, represented the whole county. They were chosen. A lot of them were old coal camps. And the whole plan there was to go to these communities, and if we just got 3 people organized, that would be the organization. They would be that. What we really were setting up at first, just setting up contacts in those communities that we could work with, or potential leaders, or what you want to call that. And we would work with these 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 individuals to learn them, to give them the organizing skills that they would need to organize the community. And that's what we did. Some of the communities we went in and just organized it ourselves. But some of them was a little harder and a little more remote, that we had to work with individuals to learn them how, to learn them the organizational skills and how to run a meeting and all that kind of stuff. And that was the whole plan. And to have these surround Hazard. We had Hazard surrounded, which was the county seat. And the PCAC would be the umbrella organization of that group. But they would be the one that elect people to the Prairie County Citizens Action Committees. What it was were the people that were organizing these communities and electing the people to this umbrella group, which Everett had started, which we'd started earlier. So we had the umbrella group, and we had these 15 community groups out there feeding into that. And we also created 15 jobs like that. We created 15 organizers and 15 community centers, which are all kinds of activities taking place in, like daycare centers, just all, and people, that was a place where people could come talk about strip mining, whatever it was. It was really a community information center is what we were really setting up, where this information would be available, because even in the 60s, people were not very mobile in eastern Kentucky. And we thought this information would be important to have it right in the community, and then you also had your little health fairs and all that kind of stuff that took place, health screenings and all that, taking place in these communities, where opposed where people have to drive into the county seat, to get just a little simple hearing test or something or other. So we had it pretty well figured out. But Washington was really looking down on it really hard. They were really getting scared about people doing this kind of things out in the community. Really harmless stuff. It was, in terms of what we were doing, it was not nothing that was going to start a revolution. That was for damn sure. But it was things that they did not want people to have access to information. Was I think was the biggest thing, and that's what we really were shooting into. It was information. There was every kind of information you wanted in one of those centers. We made sure it was there. And when people get information, they start asking questions, and that's what was happening. There was no master plan about a revolution taking over the county government. Of course, if you'd heard them talk in the courthouse, it was a bunch of communists out there, going to take over Prairie County. Who want it? So when I say master plan, that's what that whole thing was about. We thought it was the least we could do in the position that we was in, was to feed these communities information, have them organized and feed them information. We had no say-so of what that community done with that information or what kind of activity took place. That was all decided there in the community. Because there was no way we could spend all that time we could spend time in every community anyway. So that was what it was. And then I worked there and that was there, and then after I left, I went with the AVs and got connected with the Southern Leadership Conference.
And how did that happen?
Well, I was, all during that period I was active, organizing around the issues of strip mining, and I worked in black neighborhoods here in the mountains, and I was down in West Virginia one weekend, and I met Andrew Young, he was there. As a representative of SCLC at a rally, we were sponsoring the Black Lung people. I was also involved in the Black Lung stuff with Eula. And he was at this rally, and I met him. And they were just starting to implement the plan of the Great March on Washington in 1968, I believe it was. And so I'd met him and sort of got connected to it through him. And I was the Appalachian coordinator for that Poor People's March, and also on the committee of the National Organizing Committee of that also.
What was, I mean, that was predominantly a black organization, and that march, the Poor People's Movement, was, at least from the national publicity, was seen as kind of a civil rights organization.
True.
What was it like?
Well,
What
you know,
was the reality?
I always thought that also. SCLC was much more than an all-black organization. It was, in fact, all their support come from white liberals, I'm sure. But there were a lot of people, a lot of whites involved in that organization throughout the South, throughout the whole United States, and, you know, in fact. The planning committee itself, which I was the Appalachian member of that, of the march, of the whole thing, was made up of Latinos. It was made up, of course, blacks, white Appalachians, Native Americans, just all segments of the society was represented on that committee. And all their meetings, all these various groups were represented in that. It did start as a SCLC deal at first, but the SCLC couldn't deal with it. So they had to bring in all these other groups to help coordinate all this stuff. So it was very much that when it said Poor People's March, it was a Poor People's March from all groups in their societies today. They were really well represented. In fact, some of the best representatives were the Chicanos, and probably the strongest.
Was it hard organizing support for what was seen as a black organization here in the mountains?
No, it wasn't for me. I don't know about anybody else. No, I didn't have any problem. I got 3 bus loads to go from this area. You know, so that's a lot of people from a little area like this. And they were most of those people were white Appalachians, and they didn't have any reservations whatsoever. I don't know. I can't speak for the other areas what kind of problems they had, but the Chicanos certainly didn't have any problems getting people there. I do know that, and even the American Indians didn't. So you know they were all represented, and of course right during the height of this, we were down in Atlanta, just with Dr. King. We were at his birthday party, just shortly before he was killed. It was I think he was 38 or 40, I forget how old he was. But I was there at that party, and we had a big meeting that whole weekend, and we had the party. We had his birthday, the last birthday party. And even there, you know, there were people from all these various ethnic groups from all over the United States had been personally invited by Dr. King himself to that birthday party. So it wasn't just a black thing. It really wasn't.
Had you been aware of the civil rights movement?
Oh yeah.
So you kind of.
Yeah, I was very much aware of it. I'd followed it. You know, anytime you're working in communities, you know you're dealing with civil rights. And as far as I know, that we had the only black representation on the Community Action Board in this area, because we had worked the black communities also. No other community action group in these 4 counties had ever made any effort to organize the blacks. So we were into it very early into civil rights. And they become some of our most vocal members also, the blacks did, from this area.
Hey, James.
Go ahead. organization was about, and how it got started, and what it was trying to do? Kind of
Well, the Appalachian Volunteers originally got started as a group of students coming into the mountains, sort of working in the community, like painting schoolhouses and building playgrounds and that sort of thing. And until they sort of all of a sudden got the notion they wanted to get into political action stuff. And so they formed what they call, at Berea College, they formed what they call the Appalachian Volunteers, and applied for a big federal grant to do more of this kind of work in the communities, with the ideal that, you know, they would get more involved in the local politics of the community of the region, and which is really what happened. I was working with the AVs when I was doing that, all the poor people's campaign stuff. So what the AVs really did for me personally, and Eula also, she was one too, gave us much more freedom and a much broader area to work in, where we'd before that sort of been confined to a particular county or a couple of counties where we weren't doing the things we wanted to do, give us a much bigger area in which to operate in, and give us a little bit more money and a vehicle, and we got very mobile. I think probably the most successful work that was done by the Appalachian Volunteers, or Vista, in that matter. We used a lot of Vista's in fact, I was a Vista supervisor myself when I was an Appalachian Volunteer. I was a field coordinator. And I think the most effective work was done with the local volunteers, whether that be Vista or AV. And of course, you can see the results of what happened out of that. But there were other places in the mountains, you know, like we had a really fine woman that worked with the old grassroots organization, who become a local Vista out of that, and started to build a beautiful community center right out in the middle of nowhere in Breathitt County. And she's dead now. She passed away a couple of years ago, but named Nancy Cole. And she had activities going on there from the 60s right up until she died. She had garden co-ops, she had sewing co-ops going, and all that kind of stuff. You know, there was a lot of individual success stories where people just dug into the communities and really done something. You know, that lasted. That community center still there, and those programs are still going. They're still going, even though Nancy's gone, same as the Mud Creek Clinic. So the most effective work. And then you had a few hotheads, of course, radicals, or thought themselves radicals. They had never met a radical until they got to East Kentucky, and they didn't last very long. They really didn't. They got weeded out real fast, and they left just about as quick as they come. But out of that, you still had all these good local people who, at that time, even though that's how I met Eula, was through the AVs. That's how Nancy had met Eula. That's how all of us, all of a sudden, was mobile enough that we could do things with one another. Wasn't just one individual out there doing something here. You know, all of a sudden, we had a network of people throughout the mountains. There was me and Eula. There was Nancy Cole, and all kinds of people. All of a sudden, running around the mountains and doing things as a group, not as an individual, but as a group of people, you know. And this had a big impact on communities, you know, that we could come from all these various communities and work on projects within another community, or help support a strike or a boycott from other parts of the mountains. This was unheard of until, you know, we had such things as Vista and AV. So, you know, there's positive stuff come out of that. And then we got, you know, we'd go down into another state. We got down into Tennessee. We were in West Virginia. We were in Virginia, you know. And so it's really just started a network of people, local community people. And some of the other ones stayed on, you know. The good ones stayed around. And they were very, you know, they were doing things too. So all of a sudden you had this, where as opposed before you had one or two people doing things in a county or a region, you had, you know, probably 50 people working together to seeing that there was something done, you know. And that, I think that was one of the good things that come out of the AVs, get all these people communicating with one another. You know, I don't know at the times I've been on the picket line with Eula Hall and the boycotts and picket in Washington, D.C., the Justice Department, the Agriculture, and all of a sudden you had people like that working together. It was really, I thought, was really a good scene. And we still do to a certain extent. So there have been some really lasting things come out of all this, some real positive things about people getting together and working together and, and dealing with situations, dealing with these issues.
Did you meet as a group as the Appalachian Volunteers? Would you kind of get together and coordinate your activities and stuff?
Yeah, we did. Yeah, we'd have regular meetings, and then we'd have meetings we'd have the meetings that really was most effective was the ones they didn't want us to have. The directors of the program. Like when me and Eula and a bunch of us to get together and talk about going to Brookside for a picket line or going up on a strip job and stopping a bulldozer from pushing somebody's house over. That was where the real good meetings were. Of course, we had our organizational meetings too, but this is where people were really starting to sit down and talk with one another as a group of local people, And hell, I was got up on what was it? They had the insubordination within the AVs. They tried to get rid of me.
Who was running the AVs?
Milton Ogle, who's head of the West Virginia Legal Service Program now.
Was he from around here, or was he from?
He's originally from North Carolina. Yeah, you could say he's from the Appalachian area. Yeah, a good guy. I think he got in over his head, didn't know how to deal with it too. But I was brought up on insubordination. I think Eula may have been too. Nancy Cole was, all at one time. They were going to get rid of every one of us at one time.
What had you done that they were?
Huh?
What had you done that they were upset about?
Well, like I said earlier, we'd been working with this environmental group. I always referred to them. Everybody called them Man Strip Man Group and all that. The Appalachian Group to Save the Land and People. Well, they got pretty mild. That was sort of got dominated by school teachers and other liberal do-gooders who didn't want to do anything but go down and talk to the local politicians and go to Frankfurt and have this big lobbying effort, to do these, get regulation stuff like this. And what we'd done in the meantime, we'd organized another environmental group called the Mountaintop Gun Club. Environmental group, I know that name scares the hell out of people, but that's exactly what it was. And what these people were doing, they were going to these landowners as a group, as a conservation group and a sportsman's group. And they were leasing land from landowners at $1 a year to build shooting ranges on. And the whole idea behind that was very, very clear. That the reason we were doing that was that we wanted that coal operator, when he come there, he could no longer deal with that individual. He had to deal with the Mountaintop Gun Club. And that's all it was. It was just that not leave the individual out there and have his land stripped by a coal operator, which they could do. And they could still do it, but they'd a whole lot rather deal with that individual than they would the Mountaintop Gun Club. And it was a conservation group. This scared the hell out of Milton Ogle. And we did have people who go up on these strip mine benches and shoot and bang around on the weekends, just let the coal operators that they were there. So if you want to come out and talk to us, come on. We're willing to talk to any of them to come. But anyway, that scared Milton. And when he found out that we were involved in that, he thought it was insubordination. We were doing, they had to get rid of us. But what happened was we caught wind of it before we went to this big meeting. And we got our troops in order. They thought we didn't know nothing about it. Well, no, this time Milton had actually left just before that and turned it over to Dave Walls, who's up at the University of Berkeley or somewhere now. I don't know where he's at. So we got wind of this, so we got our troops in order. And when we got to this big meeting and they brought the charges up, we almost fired the director, almost got fired, and they was going to set up a committee of me and Eula and somebody else to run the whole organization. So, so it backfired them. They didn't get rid of us. And then some of us had pistols. We carried pistols to the meeting on our side. You know, as members of the Mountaintop Gun Club, too. May had something to do with it.
It sounds like you're fighting a lot of, I mean, even in the process of organizing, you're also, a lot of times you're fighting the people who kind of were setting up the organizations.
Right, right. Yeah, you
supposed to
do.
be doing
You
good.
do. Yeah, you do. Yeah, you get in more trouble, as much hot water with them as you do with the people you're trying. Yeah, as the
Well,
courthouse
it's the union
people.
or the
Yeah,
bureaucracy
whatever
of
it be. Yeah,
AD.
it's a struggle. I'm telling you. You just have to stay one step ahead of them. You know. So I did that for 20-some years. You know, I did it. And I come home. I was on the road so long. And 1982 or 83, I decided, I can't do this no more. I gotta be in one place. I gotta be a little more stable in what I am, and I guess that's what I did. But 82 or 83, I just sort of hung it up for a while, And
This seems to be kind of one of the, as we talk to people, one of the kind of real tensions that everyone faces, in that a lot of these efforts, at least from the federal level and whatnot, are set up by well-meaning liberals that want to work through kind of ordinary administrative channels.
That's true.
Believe in that system, and then when the community action thing actually starts working and people start pushing beyond those channels and trying to change that,
Right.
that it sets up this tension within the entity itself.
it does. It does. And that we found that to be very, very true with in the Appalachian Volunteers, as well as every other organization I worked at. And I've done, when I talk about working in these organizations, I've done, I had to make a living. And I've done just about everything, because a lot of people will not pay you to just, to cut them down. Like I've dug graves. I've had to dig graves. And I'm a trained legal assistant. I've worked as a paralegal. I've had to do all kinds of other things, just to get by. It's not been easy doing this. It's not easy at all. You just have to have some will, and you finally get to the point, where you do burn out.
Yeah.
And like I say, in 83, 82 or 83, I was just ready to quit, and I did. And I'd never seen none of my kids really grow up. My oldest daughter was married, and I hadn't met the husband until about 2 weeks before they were even married. So it's pretty sad, that this happens. And so I wanted some family life too. I hadn't had a whole lot of it, even though I'd been married all those years, and still married to the same woman. And I wanted to look for something I could still be in the community, or at least had connection with the old friends and make new ones also. And I was working for a gas company as a pipeline inspector until I come here. That's what I was doing. And I felt relieved at doing that, God, it's so different. I'm so relaxed. It was hard. It wasn't easy work. It wasn't hard work. And it was the easiest thing I've ever done. And then I started doing Ann Johnson, who had come into the area to do Harlan County, USA. Or she helped on that. And she decided to stay in the area after that. And then she'd come to work here a couple of years. She'd been working here a couple of years, I think. And she decided to do this whole series of videos on the war on poverty in eastern Kentucky. And she approached me with the ideal of, helping do that series of videos. And at first I really didn't want to do it. And in fact, she made several trips before I finally said, okay, I'll do it on a part-time basis. We done. And I was just working at, I'll do it on a contract basis, You pay me so much per day when I work on it. I didn't really want to work full-time at getting back out in the community. And then I got, through working with that, I got interested in doing radio. And then all of a sudden it dawned on me, well, hell, this is where it's at, I can work. I can actually drive to work every morning and drive home every night, This is what I want to do. So that's where I got interested in the radio stuff, and trying to figure out, how to not only keep in contact with the old organizations and the people that I've been involved with all these years, but to meet you people, and that's what's happening with the radio stuff right now. And that's why I'm here. That's the only reason why I'm here, is because of that. It still gives me contact with the community and the region. And I can sit there and talk into 5 states.
On that radio.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's better than jumping in the car and driving from here to West Virginia. So it's worked out real well for me.
Yeah.
And I'm still very much involved in those communities and organizations too. It's not that I just quit doing it. I'm just in a position now that where we can get more information out from these groups. They feed information to me. I feed information to them. I've got people all over the mountains calling in news stories to me. I can have people come and talk here in the studio. I can have from the community, or I can go out in that community and have community forums. And so I can do all that stuff yet. In a much more relaxed atmosphere. It's not, believe me, it's not gotten any easier in terms of the hours you put into it. You still put a lot of hours into it, but it's very soul satisfying, so to speak. That I'm home, and I've been here 7 years. I feel I feel like I'm a little more stable, and I'm around my family, and it's been really good for me. To be at radio has been really good to me, and I've really took advantage of it too. And I'm going to continue to do that also. And then it was a very, very pleasant experience working with Ann in the video series also. That was a very pleasant experience because what we really done in that, and what made me get excited about when I got thinking, it was really just a history of what I'd done also.
Yeah, that's right.
It was a whole history of what I'd done also. So that's been very pleasing also. And then the videos have done quite well, like that strip mine thing had one, a big, several award-winning videos come out of that series, and that's really good, nationwide, So that's been very pleasant also. But that's hard work now. These guys can tell you about video. It's nothing that's easy about it. A lot of drudgery in it, ain't they? And that's when the hard work begins after all this is done.
That's right.
So anything else you all would like to ask me now? I don't know, we kind of skipped
Yeah, no,
over.
I want to go back a little bit too. I'm interested in the impact of the VISTA program and what kinds of young people came in to work on that, or not so young people, how they viewed the job and the work that they were doing, how the community saw them, what kind of impact that had.
Well, you'd have, really, if you look at overall, it didn't have a lot, as the whole VISTA program overall. But if you picked out certain areas in the mountains that were well-intentioned people come in to really do something, and not just be here, to raise a little ruckus and leave the next day. And some of them people stayed. They're still here today. If you go into the areas where they really got into the community and was accepted, they had a big impact. And especially around education and education programs. I think they were the very ones who come in, the ones that come in was willing to do and start the little daycare programs and stay with that. Start a nutrition program in a school and stay with that. I think they had a big impact. In terms of politics that they brought into the area, I think what they really thought, they was coming into the area that didn't know shit about nothing. But when you get into Eastern Kentucky, you better be a pretty damn smart politician, because these people eat it. That's what they cut their teeth on politics here in Eastern Kentucky. And you're not going to put nothing over on them, And they were, and of course you had people who come in, you had Marxists in here. They didn't last 6 months, they were gone. You had people, with socialists. And there's a lot of people here that have Marxist and socialist tendencies. They still do. But they don't need these people out here trying to tell them about Marx, Engels, and all that stuff, Trotsky and all that. They know all about that stuff. They may not know who these people are, but they practiced this for years. There was no stronger socialist movement anywhere in the United States during the New Deal than there was right here in Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, and those places. Look at TVA. That wasn't Republicans built that, I can assure you. That right there was probably the biggest concentration of socialists and Marxists anywhere in the United States during that period when that thing was being conceived and built. So we know all about that stuff. We may not practice it the way they want to see it. They'd take up arms, they'd go out and take over a courthouse or all that kind of stuff, but we know about that stuff. Well, they thought they knew a little more than we did when they got here, but they didn't last long. Those people didn't last long. When they got in there and started talking about all this doctrine and stuff like that, we didn't want to hear that because we'd practiced it. We knew what it was, They were talking about theory. Well, it wasn't theory to us. So they didn't last too long. But I think a lot of them, like I say, like when people come in and really had a skill or made an effort, and people saw that they were there not just to make a name for themselves. And I think they were very successful. But overall, I'm talking about particular communities and regions, but overall I think it was a big failure for the mountains. But I think, the local people that got involved in that whole thing, and that covers the whole spectrum of people. Edith Eastern down in Pike County, Eula in Floyd County, Nancy Cole, and those kind of people who later on become community vistas. It was quite successful. I can't speak for the United States as a whole. I don't know. I can talk about this region only. I know I didn't keep them around with me long. If they didn't, if they got screwing up, we just shipped them out. We just send them somewhere else, and we don't want them, In fact, when I became the field coordinator for the Appalachian Volunteers, we had an office down right beside of Harry College here in Whitesburg, just down the street here. And the first thing I done was got rid of all the vistas. There wasn't nobody left but me. Put a lock on the door, called Milton Ogle and told him what had happened. He said I couldn't do that. I said, I've already done it. And got out and got me all local vistas. Work. I just got rid of the whole bunch. I just shipped them all out.
So you had the money, you could hire other people.
Well, they had the money. I didn't have it.
Yeah.
They had it. Milton, he had that money. He had to spend it. So we put it all into local vista activities is what we did. And how that come, you got the big community center up on Carcassonne there. It's still going as strong as it was in the 60s. They got all kinds of stuff going on up there. Yeah. And that was all started by local vistas, And these other guys were just lollygagging around, wasn't doing nothing. So we got rid of them. No, that's what you do. To be effective.
Another thing I'm interested in, or I'm kind of impressed by, is the kinds of connections that you had with and have had over the course of your life with a lot of different organizations and that have been involved in these kinds of issues. I notice here that you work for the Total Action Against Poverty for a while.
It's in the Shenandoah Valley, right? Yeah.
Roanoke worked with SCLC
right.
for the Appalachian Volunteers. You've kind of in your experience. You've seen more of these different kinds of organizations. What was the Roanoke?
Roanoke, it was just exactly what it said. It was Total Action Against Poverty.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what they were doing. They were against anything that people in poverty wanted to do. It was appropriately named. I'd taken a vacation and went up to a little town in northern Indiana, way up in the northern end of that thing, called Pleasant Lake. And I had this real pretty little apartment right over looking at the lake, and I was sort of in rest for a couple of months. And one day, somebody knocked on my door and opened the door, and it was a guy in a goatee and a black suit. And he'd flown away from Roanoke, Virginia, and to show you what he knowed, I lived near Fort Wayne, where I was, and he flew into South Bend, which was totally on the other side of the state, trying to find me. So he had, when he got to Indiana, he had traveled all the way across the state to find where I was at. And he said, I'm Jim Jones, and I'm a former priest of the Cook County Jail. I have this program down in the Shenandoah Valley. I work for a place called Total Action Against Poverty, and I need some organizers, white organizers, come and work for me. You've been recommended. I don't know where he got my name or anything like that. And well, I was getting ready to come back to Kentucky. Anyway, I'd had about all the Indiana I could take. If you ever get there, you know what I mean. I got there's just so many horseshoes you can pitch, and so many pony pools you can go to. You know, I'd had about all the Indiana I owned anyway. So the old boy, I got thinking, well, bullshit. This is the way to get back to Kentucky. It won't cost me a damn dime. So I said, okay, I'll come to Roanoke if you'll pay my way. He said, I'll buy you a plane ticket. I said, no, I ain't going to fly. I wouldn't about drop my family off at home, in Kentucky. So I was going to, I couldn't fly from Fort Wayne to Roanoke and drop them out of there. I said, no, I ain't going to do it that way. And what had happened was I'd read in no newspaper, and I'd run across an old 53 Plymouth, a one owner, 53 Plymouth this old woman wanted to sell over in another little township there. And she only wanted $150 for it. I went over and looked at this thing, mint condition, I wanted that damn car is what I wanted. And I said, I'll tell you what I will do. If you will give me the price of a plane ticket, a round trip to Roanoke to Fort Wayne, I'll come down there. I'll drive down there. What I was going to drive was that Plymouth. That's what I was wanting. He said, I'll do it. So he sent me the price of a round-trip ticket from Fort Wayne to Roanoke, and I bought that 53 Plymouth and drove it to Roanoke after I dropped my family off at home. I went down there, and they were spread out over a whole damn block. I think it finally caught fire and burnt the whole town down. They were like, I don't know, about 15 components there. It was like I bet 200 secretaries. You had to go through 15 secretaries to get to the director, whoever he was. I didn't meet him, I don't know. But anyway, Jim Jones thought he needed some white organizers to work out with these other Klansmen down there in the Shenandoah Valley. That's what he was planning on. And so I'd been there a few days, and nobody of mine showed up from over in Williamsburg, over in Bell County. And I worked with him. What, Albert, what in the hell are you doing? He showed up in a big Charger and a big wheels on it, He said, I come down here to be organized for this program. He said, what are you? That's what I'm doing here too, Albert. So there's one of my old buddies down there with me, But anyway, what I was hard in was to be the senior neighborhood organizer of this big CAP program, which covered that 4 counties spread out all over up into the Blue Ridge Mountains. It was an impossible job. And they were going to sign all these vistas to work with me, right? I was to train these vistas. And so we got started. And we put together a lot of organizations out in the counties, and at that time I think the big issue was welfare rights. So we put in all these we started all these welfare rights organizations in the surrounding counties there. Is Botetourt, Rockbridge, Roanoke, there's another one I forget. I don't remember all the counties, it was so big. But the biggest part of the activity was taking part in the black community in Roanoke, which everybody was just absolutely ignoring. Even the CAP program, was in the same general area this big CAP program was, but there was nothing being done in this black community. So I moved down in there in an old house. So I went down in that black community and got me a house and got familiar with the neighborhood and got familiar with the people. And these people wanted to do something. They were getting screwed over by the welfare system. They were getting screwed over by the CAP agency. They were getting screwed by everybody, but yet nobody wasn't paying them no attention. So I got in there and got working with them, and we started the all-black welfare rights organization right there in Roanoke, right in the town itself. And worked it around there to where we got these black and whites organized together. The whites out in the county and the blacks in the inner city blacks. And man, this didn't go well at all with Mr. Jones. I wouldn't tell you it didn't go well at all. Well, we had 17 components and 17 preachers. Honest to God. Every component there was run by a preacher. Episcopalian, Southern Baptist, Methodist, Presbyterian. The director was a Catholic. Now, I have nothing against these religions, but everything there was run by a preacher. This is all white Shenandoah Valley. To hell with the black population, you know. So what happened with these blacks and whites got to mixing with each other, you know, in this organization? It scared the hell out of the local clan, who also had worked there, you know, right into the organization, no doubt. They had member recipient. That was my instructions I got from my immediate supervisor. And I told him to kiss my ass. And I left. And I went to Highlander after that. So that was my experience in the Shenandoah Valley. But it was good because we did get the blacks and whites there working together. And who firebombed that building? I don't know. I don't think it was that welfare rights group organization. I don't think they would really got into something like that. But anyway, Jim Jones suspected that it was, but I don't think it really was, because they were really trying to work with the program. And but anyway, he thought it was, and he thought that was I was responsible for organizing them. So he would give me my instructions of what I could do from then on. And I didn't have no interest in working in Roanoke no more after that. I stayed there about 8 months or something before I got the screws put to me there. That's just the way you have to deal. You know, you live if you follow that kind of work. There's some good places and bad ones. Yeah.
What about the miners for democracy and the whole effort to kind of change that?
That was, that was more. Get into that now. That was more in West Virginia than it was here. Now, my involvement was very, very little because, like I say, it was in West Virginia. But we did do, we did get the Black Lung organizations here involved with them. And I had very little dealings with that whole movement there in West Virginia during that period, Orrin Miller. I knew Orrin Miller as a personal friend. And we did have chapters of the Black Lung organization organized here that worked with that group. But that was primarily a West Virginia thing. And Eula was involved in some of that also. I don't know what extent. She was probably a little more than I was or less. I don't have any idea. But that was the extent of her involvement in that Miners for Democracy thing.
So here you're more focused on Black Lung.
Right. Well, we didn't have anything here. We didn't have no union here. There was no union. There was no union here by then at all. None. So, but we did have these old retired miners organized into these various Black Lung groups, and they did support that movement and Orrin Miller. That was the extent of that. I'm very much aware of it. I knew what was happening, but I did not have that much involvement in that movement.
But in the organizing drive, say at Brookside and Harlem, you would have been more involved in that?
We were more involved in supporting that with the Black Lung people, and the welfare rights people supported that, and that was people we'd already had been organized. And it wasn't that we started the big organized drive around that. It was people who were already organized who'd go over and support that. And that kind of, and then of course there was always new people. You can always pick up new people sometime when something new like that's going on. But it was mostly people that had already been organized into welfare rights or Black Lung or something like that. Even some of the younger people.
Were you part of the Eastern Kentucky Welfare Rights Organization? Did you help start that?
Yeah. That was, me and Eula worked with that, and that's where I got my organizing experience when I went down into Virginia, working with welfare right recipients here. Yeah.
What was that like? What was the welfare rights organization like?
I think it was one of the best organizations there was in the mountains, and the reason I say that is, it was the only time, here you already had these old coal miners organized into the Black Lung Association. And it was really, it was miners. That's what it was, old retired miners and you know, trying to get a bill passed and trying to get some benefits for the illness. And then all of a sudden you get this welfare rights people organized, which was primarily, in a lot of cases, mothers. This was mothers, you know, the people who stayed home and took care of the children. Of course, there was men in it too. But it's mostly dominated by women, which I think was really good. And then all of a sudden, they figured out, why don't we join forces with the Black Lung Association? So you had ECRO and the Black Lung Association working together as a group. That just about covered the whole spectrum of people. Welfare, mothers, families, working with these. And before that, there was no way somebody worked in the mines would have worked with a welfare recipient. Let's be honest about it, man or woman. But for the first time, these two groups come together as a unit, as a lobbying unit. And I think after that happened, it became much more effective. That's when the laws started getting passed. That's when free textbooks were bought into the schools. That's when free lunches was bought into the schools or reduced prices. All that started happening after these two groups combined. They got together, which was a very positive. And then when the Black Lung Law was passed in '69, the Mine Health and Safety Act, the Black Lung Bill was part of that, was just as much an effort of the welfare rights people. It was just as much of an effort, it was just as much a victory for them as it was those miners, because they had done, you know, they was one getting on the buses, going talking to the congressmen and the senators and things along with these. And I think that made a big impression on Congress and Washington at that time. That, hey, we better do something. Now these people have really got their shit together. We better pass some damn mine health and safety and get these people off their backs. I thought it was a very effective thing. I don't know where it was planned like that or it just happened. I think it just gradually happened. It said, hey, we got a lot in common. You know, we're all out to get a better shake out of this deal.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it really is. That just how that fused together and becomes so effective. It really is. And it was the most moving thing I've ever seen. And the Black Lung Bill that come out of that, plus all the reforms in welfare that come out of that also. But that was the biggest economic boost that Eastern Kentucky has ever had. That is the mainstay of the economy right now in Eastern Kentucky. If you took all the people in Eastern Kentucky, took all the benefits away from these miners, they wouldn't be a Walmart in Eastern Kentucky. They wouldn't be a A&P in Eastern Kentucky. They wouldn't be a Kroger. If you took that one program away from these coal miners, they're the people who not only draw their black lung benefits, they also draw UMWA pensions, and they also draw their Social Security benefits. They're better off now in economically better off than they've ever been in their life. They're the people who buy the big items. They're the people who buy the big trucks. They're the people who buy the fancy shotguns from the sporting goods store, and they're the ones that got the money to spend at the local Kroger. It ain't these guys working in the mines. They just barely getting by. So if you took those out of Eastern Kentucky, you wouldn't see a shopping mall between here and Raleigh. So I think that's been the biggest economic shot that Eastern Kentucky ever had was that bill. It's pumped millions of dollars into this local economy. That's what this economy is based on. It's a welfare state. This whole economy in Eastern Kentucky. If you look at this section, Letcher County's got 45% unemployment. 45%. These people don't have nothing. We got 45%. They've drawn out of unemployment benefits. They're not working. They're existing on food stamps, or
What do you think of the prospects, or maybe we can, as we finish up here, we can talk about where you think things are now and where they need to go in terms of dealing
Well,
with some of these problems that
Where they are now, of course, you only got a glimpse of the area. And driving up from Lexington, it's awful pretty on the Parkway.
we also drove down.
Right. So you may have seen the good and the bad and the ugly part of it. But if you really look at it, go over it, fly over it sometime in an airplane. Strip mining, what we preached ever since it started, has destroyed the economic base of the region, or this particular region I'm living in. It's not only destroyed the economic base, it was you have to hold it responsible for the decline in deep mine industry. It's cheaper to strip it than it is to deep mine it. So not only did you destroy the environment, you also destroyed that whole economic base. Instead of maybe 40 years of work in the coal in this part of the country, you may have had 100 years or 150 years of deep mining. And deep mining has its problems, there's no doubt about that, but it does employ more people. Other little businesses sort of flourish, like the lumber companies and all the little small business. It was always, they always done business with the deep mines. You take strip mining, they don't buy 2x4s from or lumber, British cloth, and all this stuff from these local businesses. They don't need it. So the economic base, strip mining has destroyed the economic base of the region. And I can't speak I'm speaking about the region that me and you live in. They've destroyed any potential that we may have had in terms of tourism. Nobody's going to drive from New York to see our strip mines. They might come one time, but they never come back. And in terms of other factories coming in, strip mining has destroyed the water. We don't have drinking water in eastern Kentucky now. I got a well 120 foot deep. I can't drink the water out of it. I had another one 70 foot deep. I can't even use it. It's full of oil. Just driving over the road here, looking at the infrastructure of these cities where, we don't even have adequate sewage for a city, and you certainly can't entice an industry in. If you don't have sewage, it can't take care of a town population of 1,200. What's the future? I don't know. I don't know. The educational system is about one of the worst you'll ever find. It is the new School Reform Act. That may or may not make a difference. I don't know. Hopefully it will. To be honest about it, the only thing I would see right now in the immediate next 10 years would be some kind of a massive program, which could only be financed by the government, because I know private industry is not going to do it, is the reforestation and the cleaning up of this environment here in eastern Kentucky. I think would create thousands of jobs. I mean really jobs. To put the trees back on the mountains, to clean up the streams, to build sewer and sewage treatment plants and water, and put in water. I think immediately you could solve the unemployment problem in eastern Kentucky at least with just a program like that. And not only that, you look at the people that would give jobs. It'd be heavy equipment operators, it'd be carpenters, be pipe fitters. I mean, really skilled jobs could be created, which would create other things, other businesses around that. And I think in the long run, it'd be a costly program. But I think in the long run, within the cleaning up of the environment here and creating these and bringing in these other businesses, that eventually that would self-feed itself. And then you could talk about bringing in industry. But there's no way you can seriously talk about bringing industry into this area and really take a good look at the landscape around you and what all has to be done before we can get into the talking stage of going down and talking to some manufacturer coming in and putting in a plant. There's just too much has to be done. I don't see that being done. don't see none of the local leaders taking the initiative and saying, look, let's clean these rivers and these creeks up. Let's build let's get our water systems up to par. And let's plant trees back on the side of this mountain instead of this old ugly vegetation they got. And really do so. And then let's seriously start talking about bringing in the industry. That's all I can see that could happen.
What about community groups starting to, I mean, do you see a chance for doing the kind of organizing you've done over your life to have the pressure brought by the people who live here, an unemployment league starting maybe?
Right. Yeah, I think it's going to take a bigger effort than what we've put forth in the past. I really do that. I think it's going to take a lot more people to dealing with it. And God knows we've got them because, if you got 45% unemployment, there's a lot of people ain't doing nothing. I bet they're getting bored. Yeah, it's going to take that. It'll take a bigger effort than what we've put forth in the past. Mm-hmm. And another thing we got to do, we got to, it's got to cut across racial lines and all that. Mm-hmm. Forget about what color people are or what sex they are, and really work together, in some kind of unity. Just be people, not white, black, female, male, and all that kind of stuff. I think everybody knows who they are, and just work together as people, and not have all this, all this other rhetoric bullshit that keep people apart. Mm-hmm. Just be yourself, get out there and really do something. And I think it's what it's going to take. I really do. This thing was organized out of the OEO here. It's the second biggest employer in the state. I'm sorry, county. Mm-hmm. City of Whitesburg, right now. Mm-hmm. The school system is the bigger employer than Appleshot. That's how bad the coal industry is here. We only employ 38 people. So you can figure out how bad off the rest of the county is.
Yeah.
Real bad.
Yeah.
Well, no, this has been wonderful. Thanks very much for
I'm glad
taking all morning.
No, that's fine. I'd set this time aside for it, so it's no big problem. I hope we've not left nothing out.
Well, if we go through this and we find
you didn't ask me how many kids I had. I got 6.
Okay, that's good.
5 married and 1 at home.
Do they all live in the area?
Huh?
Do they live in the area?
Yeah, they all live within. Come and eat dinner with me. No, they all live within about 4 or 5 mile area. It's pretty neat to have them all around you yet. Yeah, and we got one teenager at home yet, 15-year-old boy.
So you can see your grandchildren and keep up with them.
Got 7 of them.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, 7 grandchildren.
You got more time to spend with them then.
No, I really stay busy.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I really do. Yeah, I do get to see more of them, but not, never as much as you want to.
Yeah.
We work here sometimes here we work 14, 16 hours a day here. So, but there, if I need to go home and see them for an hour, I can always do that too.
It sounds to me like this radio show that you're doing, in particular going out into these communities, holding these town meeting type things that you were talking about. Has the potential of doing some of the things we were talking about.
We believe that too. I believe that, and I thought of this thing about a year ago, and the first one we're done. We have people who underwrite us, and we had this one lumber company in Flintwood, Virginia, which is in Dickinson County, who was the oldest underwriter we had. They were the first underwriter we had. They liked the radio station. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, it just dawned on me, I'd love to go to that old lumber store and do a live broadcast. Mm-hmm. Just go there, And so I called them, and said, sure, anytime you want to do it, just come on over. And so we figured we'd go around, be 4 or 5 people show up, we'd talk to them, and have a little radio show, and that'd be it. We went over there, and there was like 60 people showed up with banjos, and they had fiddles and mandolins, and we just had the awfulest time there was between all these shells of this, like linoleum over here, paint, nails. And people were dancing, in little spaces. had the office time, all kinds of storytelling, you know, and all that shit. You know, I said, God damn, this is fun. We got to do this again, but we got to do it in a more organized manner, you know. But it was great. And then from that, we just, like I say, I'm really experimenting with it. Just see what I can go, how it can go. It takes a lot. It takes quite a bit of work to do it. It really does. And then you have to have, you know, usually we'll have to take somebody's program away from them. There's something to do that. So you get into all kinds of little nitpicking shit, you know. But we will get more into it, and hopefully get in more and more into, especially around the environmental issues and the economic issues. Later on. But right now we're just kind of feeling our way through it, learning how to do it technically and all that. Just the logistics of the thing takes a lot of work.
Yeah, it sounds like a good forum for
we're
airing some of these issues.
Real excited about it. In fact, next one is, we just had one 2 weeks ago, and I got another one scheduled for the 20th of next month. I'm going to take a little time off in the middle of the month, and then coming back and doing one, and I hope to do one around this thing over in Harlan County, around where they found all this toxic waste in the soil and the water systems when that company moved out over there. Hope to do one there in November. I'm working on that right now. Get one over there and let them talk about that issue, and let the rest of the listening area know that, you know, there's a group of people fighting a toxic waste dump over here and all that kind of stuff. And we got to do the senior citizen stuff too, I think. You know, that's important. They got problems also.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
Okay, well, turn off here.